Welcome back for a new criminally underrated top 5 list. This time, I thought, let's go back in time to the fourth console generation. So, with that said, this is in my opinion, keep in mind, 5 criminally underrated games for the Sega Genesis. So, with that said, first up, honorable mention 1. The honorable mention goes to Clay Fighter, which honestly it's interesting as both the Super Nintendo and Genesis versions are a little different overall. In the music department, I like the Sega Genesis version of the game better. Personally, I feel this game deserves more love than it gets. It definitely has a loyal cult following throughout the years, really, of all the Clay Fighter games. Very unique games that help it stand out from other fighters of the same time period. With that said, I do highly recommend checking out Clay Fighter if you get a chance and cares about 16-bit era fighting games. Coming in at number 5. Yes, really. I'm sure some people will look at me weird, but I consider criminally underrated. In general, I consider Echo games underrated, but I specifically feel that way about Echo the Tides of Time. They also had an interesting game also released only on the Dreamcast. But with that said, Echo the Tides of Time definitely has a high difficulty curve, keep in mind. I always did find interesting also the front case artwork, how the turtle even crosses over, as well as the fin of the dolphin. Personally, this is probably one of the most unique platformer experiences you have of this time period. Personally, I recommend checking it if you want to try some very unique and different from most standard 16-bit platformers of this time period. Echo the Dolphin will have you covered. It's definitely unique and very distinctive from all other platforms of the time. I personally think the music is actually not half bad. I think the soundtrack is underrated, honestly. The game itself, and I actually like some of the creature designs in it. It tries to stick a little bit more in reality with elements of fantasy combined. But it is definitely interesting in my opinion. Coming in at number 4, sadly I don't have complete in box, just the cartridge. For me, coming at number 4 is Eternal Champions, one of the best exclusive fighters on the Sega Genesis. It would get a sequel exclusively to the Sega CD, weirdly enough, which I still find kind of weird. But with that said, Eternal Champions is definitely different than most of your standard 16-bit fighters of the same time period. It definitely had its own distinctive elements to it that really helped it separate itself. It actually had something similar to fatalities, surprisingly as well, from Mortal Kombat. Now, I would say if you're at all interested in learning about more obscure fighting games, check out Eternal Champions. It's definitely worth a try. Coming in at number 3 is, I think, at the time was ahead of its time of platformers, and that is Vector Man. Vector Man is a game that I personally have a real fondness for and quite a heavy nostalgia for, as it would be one of the first platformers I would ever play on the Sega Genesis. My very first was Sonic the Hedgehog. My second ever will be one of the next games on this list. With that said, I like the sort of like clay aesthetic sort of look that the game has. It's actually really fun. It does have, of course, a decent difficulty That's for sure. If you want a good challenge, this is good. But I think the actual gameplay is solid, and it plays a lot better than a lot of other side-scrolling platformers at the same time period. It's a great action platformer that frankly more people need to give a chance to. If you like games like Mega Man and things of that nature, honestly I do recommend checking out Vector Man. If you're into Now, when this came out, it was relatively successful, but I don't see a lot of people talking about this game. It's another one of those games that has more of a hardcore cult following more than anything. But Vector Man and actually Vector Man 2 are both great games that I feel are indeed criminally underrated. Coming in at number 2 was the second ever side-scrolling platformer I would play, and like I did in a special past video about this game, Chikan, this was the game that also got me into horror games, because it introduced me to a dark fantasy world with very, very high difficulty, that's for sure. If you like games with a big challenge, well, you found it right here. It is an awesome, I love the very grim and dark feel and atmosphere with the music and the actual like level design. If you liked games like say early Castlevanias and things of that nature, that kind of like feel, then this is perfect. Just know that you're in for a heck of a challenge when it comes to this game. You're definitely gonna have a challenge on your hands, that's for sure. One of the things, this was really my introduction to also hard as nail games, that you will have to basically memorize the levels from beginning to end. Luckily, it does have checkpoints, but you basically have to make it to a 50% mark of the stage in order to get. Now, one thing I do like about the game is you do have basically infinite lives, though after you lose, you have to start back at the very beginning of the level, so there's a lot of repetition, keep in mind. But with that said, still, I think it is superb and great. Just for the character design, the actual mythos is interesting. There's actually a custom done video here on YouTube, about 25 minutes long, that goes in depth about the like story behind Chikan. So definitely, if you get a chance, check it out. It's actually a pretty cool watch. And in general, the game is awesome. It was really also my introduction to dark fantasy themes, which today I love thanks to Dark Souls and everything. But if it wasn't for Chikan, I may have not gone into the Souls games or into horror. Coming at number 1 is a very obscure Genesis game. Only hardcore, real hardcore Sega fans are gonna really know. Basically, the best way to describe this is it was Sega's answer to Zelda. Basically, it's this is what you get if you combined The Legend of Zelda with certain elements of Final Fantasy, but also mixed in elements of Pokemon. Except, this game actually predates Pokemon. Fun fact. This game was released in 1994. You're talking 2 or 3 years before Pokemon. So, in some ways, maybe Pokemon stole from Crusader of Century. But yeah, also developed by Atlas. This is a very hard to find game nowadays. I'm glad I got it a long time ago, because, woo, just look up the prices on like eBay and stuff now on this, or on pricecharting.com. It's absurd. But with that said, as a longtime also Zelda fan, I originally gave this a shot, and I was very pleasantly surprised. This would go down as one of my favorite Genesis games of all time, and I think one of the best Sega exclusive games ever. If you're looking for an incredible action adventure game, from this era, this is great, but I definitely don't recommend paying the price this game is going for nowadays. If you are curious, maybe download a emulator and try it that way, because I mean, unless you're a hardcore like Sega collector, I wouldn't recommend, though. It is an incredible game, and I think easily the most criminally underrated game on the Genesis. Keep in mind, that's just my personal opinion. So, with that said, leave a comment below and tell me what your thoughts are and why, in your opinion, are some of the most criminally underrated games on the Sega Genesis. With that said, I will be, in the next couple of days, putting a poll giving 3 options for the next top 5 criminally underrated list. You can vote on and let me know which you'd prefer me to do. The 3 options are going to be PS1, the Nintendo GameCube, and the Super Nintendo. So stay tuned, and I'll see y'all again soon enough. Stay safe out there.